Are live, just seeing how things are going. Great. All right. So it is Tuesday, March 9, and awesome. Remember our amazing TA time. But we are here to cover Unit 3. Before we do, here is our poll. I'm curious as to what you think. The best chicken sandwich here. I mean, we're talking about the Revolutionary War already. I'm curious, do you prefer the Chick-fil-A? Answering McChicken. We got others, but pop it in the good chicken sandwiches, especially as we're starting to study APUSH. All right, it's working for some people. I'm sorry if I'm cutting out very badly. Sorry if it's a little bit choppy. It should have started, though. So, yeah, a little bit overrated for some people. Sorry about that if that's the way it's working. But hopefully we are working all right. I keep cutting in and out, which is not good. All right. All right. So, with that out of the way, now that we have our follow Fiveable on a variety of social media platforms. That's always a good idea as well. So make sure that's happening. So that. Hoping this isn't live. This isn't choppy for you folks that are live, and hopefully it's not choppy for those of you that are watching. Hopefully it gets a little bit better. Don't know what's going on with Vimeo. Sessions. We are here on Tuesdays at 9 p.m. So hopefully it's not 9 p.m. for every. You can see the full calendar with notifications if you click on that link there. The screen was before, but hopefully it's like it's still a little bit choppy. So hopefully you can see the cram schedule right there. Here's what we're hoping to cover tonight. All right, so some people are not seeing this even starting, but hopefully. Hopefully it's as a Vimeo that they're able to correct at some point. I want to hit a couple of FAQs, some frequently asked questions people were asking for Discord. We're going to talk about the exams, just to give another overview once again, and then talk about period 3, give you some practice questions, some practice documents, some study tips, etc. And then obviously ask questions in the chat throughout, as well as we'll have some question and answer time at specific points. Discord. Somebody was saying, I don't know where to start. How do I overweight figures, events, and APUSH? How can I retain all of this information? That is a lot, but my advice to you would be you got to start broad, right? You don't want to lose the forest because of the trees, make sure you start broad, get deeper, make some connections, and make sure that you're starting with perhaps the start and end date for individual periods. That might be a good way to do it. Yeah, might be a good way to do it. I think starting with some, it would be a good idea, but I would recommend against that because it's a good idea to be able to learn all of the content. Well, let me check on this really quick to see what we can do about this Wi-Fi. Yeah, I'm not able to restart. My Wi-Fi is not bad. Hey, maybe this looks a little bit better. Let's see if this is working. Ooh, I think this might be slightly better. Maybe put in the chat if this is starting to get a little bit better. Trying to tweak some of my Vimeo settings here. Hopefully it's getting a little bit better. Yeah, Wi-Fi issue. Okay, this is good. This is good. All right, it's getting better for people. I don't know what happened, but I guess as some people are praying to the AP gods, it's working a bit better, so that's good. I'm glad. So you folks can hear me, and you can see my screen. You can see me. I'm less choppy even for myself. So thanks, Vimeo, for getting your act together finally. All right, let's get back to this and talk about some APUSH. Here we go. So first of all, somebody was asking, how do I study because it just seems so overwhelming? I said start broad, then get deeper, make connections along the way. That would be a good way to do it. You want to make sure that if you're talking about the American Revolution, you branch out a little bit, see what you can do. Someone asked, is it too early to take a practice exam? I would recommend that you study as early as possible, as much as possible, and so even if you don't necessarily have the ability to answer all the questions, do what you can. It's never too early. Practice with what you can. Maybe go to AP Classroom, do the personal progress checks for each period. You can practice questions that are just in period 3, which is the one we're covering tonight. So do practice whenever you can, as much as you can. That would be my advice for that one. And then lastly, a lot of people were asking about, should you take notes during the cram session? That's kind of a up to you thing. Some people find that taking notes during this is useful. Some people annotate the slides in certain ways. I would suggest maybe it's a good idea, but maybe don't just write down everything that I say, because first of all, that's just too much. But mind maps, outlines, sketch notes, however you take notes best is probably what I would recommend doing, because you want to make sure that you're retaining the information and making connections. I cannot emphasize how important connections are. So that would be a good idea. Several people in the chat are asking about personal progress checks. Those are opened by your teacher at different times. I personally open them at the beginning of the year so that way students can do the practice whenever it makes sense for them. Maybe ask your teacher and say, yeah, as Thomasina is saying in the chat, ask your teacher to open up the personal progress checks so that way you can start practicing those. But if they don't open them until a little bit later and you do most of your reviewing content now and then doing your practice questions later, that works too. So no stress either way. No stress. A reminder that the exams are a little bit different this year. We have 3 different administrations. Administration 1 is actually less than 2 months away, so oh boy, here we go. We're entering into the cram session indeed for all of our AP exams. Remember, we have some that are paper, some that are digital, and just to make sure that we are sort of on the same page when it comes to how this is going to work going forward. Remember, the paper is the usual format, so if you took AP World, if you took AP Euro, I don't know why you would take that before APUSH, but if you took AP World, it's the same kind of test, and it's 55 multiple choice questions in 55 minutes, 3 short answer questions in 40 minutes, then you get a DBQ and an LEQ all together in 100 minutes, and you get some choices along the way. I showed you this slide last time, but if you're curious and want a bit more, this is one way to do it. If you're digital, the main change is that you don't have as many choices when it comes to your SAQs, especially when it comes to the second set, because you don't have a long essay question. You have 2 SAQs instead of an additional LEQ. So that would be one option for you. If you are doing digital, just be aware that there are some differences here related to what you're going to be doing. Now, We're going to give you some practice questions of various types. And remember, we even have dedicated cram sessions just for the free response questions. So if you're freaking out and being like, oh man, I need help on the essays, I need help on the writing, we got you. We're getting there a little bit later. So just to be aware. Let's do some Unit 3 overview. Just Route 54 to 1800 is Unit 3, or Period 3, depending on which one you use. 1754. The chat is a little bit delayed versus the video, but let's see what we can do here. In the chat, tell me why the dates are the way that they are for Unit 3. Why is 1754 important? Why is 1800 important? This gives us just a sense of where we are in history chronologically. It's a good idea to maybe start with some broad overviews of dates. So 1754, why is that important? 1800, why is that important? There's a picture there, a nice painting that might be able to help us a little bit. Looks like Lexa was the first one to get it right. Indeed, it is the French and Indian War. The American Revolution is in the middle, yes, and then the French and Indian War is also called the 7 Years' War. Yes, as Dan says, it is the beginning of the 7 Years' War. Nice job. 1800 is the election, sometimes called the Revolution of 1800. Yes, this is the election of a certain president, a.k.a. Thomas Jefferson. So many of us are talking about that. Yeah, the federalism starts to decline in terms of the Federalist Party. All right. So our big three topics here. Nice job, folks. It looks like we got some good Unit 3 knowledge already going on. The Revolutionary War before and after. We got a new government, so this is going to be the Washington and Adams administration. And then lastly, we're going to have migration and trade, sort of a constant theme throughout this unit, both in terms of Americans moving farther west, interacting with Native Americans, trading with other countries, international affairs, all kinds of stuff. All right. Yes, nice job, everybody. Here we go. So jumping into the 7 Years' War. This is also sometimes called the French and Indian War. That's somewhat confusing because the French and Indian War represents the opponents of American colonists, not the people fighting. So it's not a war between the French and the Indians. It's a war against the French and the Indians by the English and the English colonial settlers. So there we go. We have a fantastic map there that shows you some of the disputed territories. Now, why does this all matter? Well, because remember, it's an imperial rivalry between France and England. If you took AP World last year, you know that this 7 Years' War is kind of like World War Zero in a sense. It happens all over the globe. There's conflict in Europe. There's conflict in India. There's also conflict here in North America. It's actually started in North America by a guy named George Washington. Maybe you've heard of him. We'll talk about him again, I guess. And this is going to be the colonists who are on the side of the British fighting against the French and the Indians, who are mostly their allies. Remember last time we talked about fur trading. That's one of the reasons why the French are on the side of the Native Americans. All right. We're also going to see a lot of Native Americans on the side of the French because of fur trapping, but also but they're also interested in siding with the French because English people are stealing their land. English people are notorious for their greediness in terms of land, so that's going to be a problem. So there's a little bit of this land and debt issues. But you also have to know this because afterwards, in 1763, sorry, I went a little bit too far there. 1763, there are 4 big events that all come together that make this a really big turning point. And PEEP is a great way to remember it. It's an acronym that stands for the Proclamation Line of 1763, where the King of England says, don't go any further because you're going to antagonize the Native Americans because the French have lost the war and they get kicked out. But the English don't necessarily want to have to fight the Native Americans over and over and over again. So Proclamation Line of 1763 ticks off the colonists. It's the end of the 7 Years' War, as we already mentioned. It is the end of Salutary Neglect. More on that in just a second. And it is also Pontiac's Rebellion. Remember that one too. Pontiac's Rebellion is the sort of last stand of the Eastern Native Americans fighting against English colonists. They realize they have guns and ammunition and supplies from the French, but the French are now gone. It's kind of a use it or lose it scenario, and so they better start using it. So PEEP, Proclamation Line of 1763, end of 7 Years' War, end of Salutary Neglect, and Pontiac's Rebellion. Great way to remember that as an important turning point. Speaking of the end of Salutary Neglect, let's talk about this. Yes, as some of you are already talking about, we're talking about taxes and tea. Remember that the United States is not a thing yet. It's the British North American colonies, and they are under control of the British Crown, and there's a policy of mercantilism we talked about last time. Things like the Navigation Acts that say you have to trade only with Britain. Britain gets your raw materials. Britain gets first dibs and things like that. but it's not really very well enforced because it's expensive to enforce it. So there's this thing called salutary. Healthy ignoring is another way to put that. Those of you that know Spanish, you know salud or saludable, or if you know a lot of fancy English words, you can talk about salubrious, meaning healthy. Either way, salutary neglect, healthy ignoring, and that's going to be talking about how the British don't necessarily enforce their own navigation acts or their own mercantilist policies. That all changes after the 7 Years' War, which is the end of salutary neglect. And that's why they start to make all these taxes, because the 7 Years' War is very expensive. And they say, hey, the British say, hey, North American colonists, we put our lives on the line, we put our treasure on the line to save your behinds from the French and the Indians. So how about you do your fair share and pay some taxes? And the colonists say, nope, don't think so. We're going to rebel. So we get the taxes and the tea, as we're going to talk about. So, Stamp Act is the first direct tax in 1765. It's the end of salutary neglect. This is going to lead to all sorts of things like smuggling and protests and boycotts. It's not very good at all for the British because the Native Americans are not a problem as much as now the colonists. So, oh boy, there we go. We also are going to see common sense happening during this time. These are all things that are leading to the American Revolution. Common Sense, written in 1776 by the original T-Paine, Thomas Paine, and he's going to be talking about how it doesn't make any sense for the British to rule over this vast continent. They're so small. And then we're also going to see other things that lead to the American Revolution, like the Sons and Daughters of Liberty, right? These are people who are going to be fighting for the rights of the British North American colonists, the rights of Englishmen. They're going to be just a couple examples of growing tension. So again, make sure you don't get too lost in the woods here. Make sure the overall thing here is that tensions are growing between the British and the British North American colonists. A lot of it has to do with representation. No taxation without representation. A lot of it has to do with taxation. And it's partly just because of a change. The example that I always like to give to my students is, imagine that I didn't give them a seating chart in APUSH all year, and then suddenly I just slam a seating chart on them mid-October, approximately when we cover this. They might be kind of mad about that. Well, I have every right as a teacher to put on a seating chart. The thing is, we haven't had a seating chart before, so it's a big change. They don't like it. And then there's all sorts of problems related to that. So that's one of the ways you can think about the end of salutary neglect, and thus the beginning of all the taxes, and there's things like the Boston Tea Party, etc. But also, beyond that, there's in line in the background is this thing called the Enlightenment and the First Great Awakening. You should be familiar with these a little bit. I like to call this a swirling vortex of individualism that says me, my, and I get to make my own decisions. I don't have to listen to no king. I don't have to listen to no church. So there's this rights of Englishmen, sure. So a lot of this comes from Enlightenment philosophers that we'll mention in just a second. But remember, the Englishmen, ever since the Magna Carta, have insisted on certain rights. And that's not changing for British North American colonists. They think they have rights too, because they're also English. Then there's also going to be the First Great Awakening. Remember, the First Great Awakening is saying things like, you don't have to listen to a pope or a king or a bishop. This is where we get lots of lay reading. You don't even have to listen to some fancy schmancy preacher who went to Harvard. Exactly. This is more individualism and more Protestantism. You can read the Bible for yourself. Well, it doesn't take a genius to be able to notice the step from I don't have to listen to a king or a pope in terms of religion to I don't have to listen to a king in terms of politics, and now we start getting closer and closer to the American Revolution. So there you go. There are ideas about representative government that have been around for a long time. We see the Virginia House of Burgesses, New England town meetings, etc. But these ideas start to get more and more prevalent during this time because of other Enlightenment ideas. Think of like John Locke and social contract theory. Think of Montesquieu and the separation of powers. A lot of the leaders of the colonial legislatures are going to be reading many of these guys, these French philosophers, English philosophers. They're all involved in the Republic of Letters, writing to each other. And they're all talking about all these Enlightenment values that are, of course, coming over to the Americas. Now we've gotten to the actual American Revolution. And remember, this is not, as much as some people would wish, this is not an AP military history course. So we are not super interested in talking about all the military technology or the military tactics of the American Revolution. We're more interested in what caused it. That's what we just covered. Maybe a turning point or two, why we win. We meaning the American colonies, because this is AP American history, AP US history, not AP British history. Sorry if we have any Brits listening. But then also interested in the after effects and what comes after. So the American Revolution, let's talk a little bit about that. You should be aware that there are patriots and loyalists. Remember John Adams' famous estimation that about a third of Americans were a third of British North American colonists at the time were loyalists, about a third were patriots, and about a third were like, I don't care, just don't leave me alone and don't burn my crops down. So be aware that there are some loyalists along the way, as well as some patriots. Please don't think that all colonists were in favor of the American Revolution, because that's certainly not true. Why did the British North American colonists win? Partially, that's going to be because of militias and the Continental Army. The militias are pretty hastily organized, and sometimes George Washington's going to complain about them and their lack of discipline, but the Continental Army is very helpful. Speaking of George Washington, and here comes the general, I'm never going to miss an opportunity to make some Hamilton references. I will not throw away my shot. Here comes the general. George Washington and his brilliant military strategy actually plays a very, very large role in them winning as well. The Battle of Saratoga, if you knew one battle, I would maybe know Saratoga. If you know two battles, probably add in Yorktown. Saratoga is a big battle where the Americans defeat the British, and thus they convince the French to get on their side. And this is a big deal because the Americans then now can get guns and ships, and so the balance shifts from France. There we go. The Battle of Yorktown, 1781, is where Cornwallis surrenders. He's a British general. And then, here we go. This is the world turned upside down. It seems like the war is almost over by now. The war eventually ends in the Treaty of Paris in 1783, but that's going to be a little bit later. Aha, a Hamilton of references. Nice job, nice job. There are plenty of women who are going to be getting involved as well, right? We had the Daughters of Liberty before. We had women involved in colonial boycotts and things like that. But we're also going to see people like Mary Hayes and Deborah Sampson who are literally fighting. Molly Pitcher fighting on the front lines as patriots. And then afterwards, we're going to see a lot of things that come out of the American Revolution, like abolitionism, other revolutions, like the Haitian Revolution, and Republican motherhood. So abolitionism, well, if we're talking about freedom, how about freedom for those enslaved peoples? Yeah, probably a good idea. Revolutions in the Americas inspire revolutions in Haiti, in the Caribbean, and then Republican motherhood, remember that's the idea of women should be able to raise sons and daughters to be good citizens, raise their daughters to be good mothers and wives, raise their sons to be good citizens. And yeah, it's still not quite women having a lot of rights, but at least they have some role in the new republic. Yeah, we definitely forgot the ladies. We didn't listen to Abigail Adams, who told us to remember the ladies. So that was a bit of a problem. So how was the American government organized during this time? Well, remember, all the different colonial legislatures were jealous of their own power, but they decided to join together for the purposes of defeating the British, thanks to the Articles of Confederation. So, the Articles of Confederation, those are going to be in effect from 1777 to 1789. It is the first governmental system of the United States, and it has some unique characteristics. You may have done some sort of comparison between the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution. Think about that. This one is unicameral. It only has one house. We don't have a House and a Senate. We just have basically a House, and every state has their own one vote. It's a weaker central government because remember the overarching concern about these people who are in the British North American colonies at the time is we're scared of centralized government, aka the British monarchy. It's going to have, because it's weaker, it's going to have no taxation, and it needs unanimity to ever change things, and supermajorities all the time, so nothing gets done with efficiency, and it doesn't accomplish a whole lot by the end. So that's not good. But is it all bad? Does it have some accomplishments? Absolutely. It gets the American colonies through the Revolutionary War. I mean, that's a big accomplishment, right? This is trying to unite the colonies together against the British. It accomplishes that. It is also going to accomplish some things regarding land. Apologies here. Here we go. There we go. The Northwest Ordinance is a big deal. Remember, the Northwest Ordinance organizes what some might call the sort of Midwest today. It's where I'm coming from in western Michigan. Hey-o. Shout out to the hand, pointing over here. So this is where I live. Hey, Michigan. Looks like a hand. America's high five. But the idea here is that it's organizing land that is taken after the Revolutionary War, and it is breaking it up into certain chunks. It's making it more organized. It's setting aside some land for public education. There's no slavery there, which is, kind of interesting. I mean, it makes sense that there's not a lot of labor-intensive cash crops going on there at the time, but it does indicate that there's potentially going to be a north-south split going forward. So, there we go. But the Articles of Confederation obviously have a lot of weaknesses. And so there is a call to change some of that, and that's going to be the Constitutional Convention. This is not AP Gov, but it is worth your time to know some things about the Constitutional Convention, constitutional compromises, things like Shays' Rebellion. Remember, this is the rebellion of farmers, indebted farmers in Massachusetts that lead to a call for a stronger central government by many of the richer white dudes who are in charge. They meet at Annapolis for Annapolis Convention to try to talk about trade issues. Doesn't quite solve anything. Let's move on. Do it again another year. That's the Constitutional Convention. Initially, they're supposed to just revise the articles, but they end up actually writing a whole new constitution. There are many you should be familiar with along the way. There's things like the Great Compromise, brokered Connecticut's Roger Sherman, right? The bicameral legislature. As you can see here, the Capitol has both a House and a Senate. Big states like the House, small states like the Senate. That way we keep everybody happy and keep them together. There's the Three-Fifths Compromise that decide that enslaved Africans are only 3/5 person. Yikes, dehumanization. That's not cool. But that was intended to keep the southern states as part of the country. Okay? There's also things like the Fugitive Slave Clause and the fact that they will not outlaw the slave trade until, 20 years later, aka 1807, 1808. So there are some compromises around slavery that don't get resolved. Plus, there's also just the separation of powers, right? It turns out that people don't like the idea of a king, but they need a president, they need some sort of executive. So there's sort of a, I guess you could call it a compromise between those that really want a strong centralized government, think your Hamiltons, and those that really, really don't. So we have a separation of powers. There's also going to be a bit of a compromise because of federalism. Remember, federalism is the idea that there is a state, a local, and a national government, and they all share power in different ways. So it's not just going to be one national government and nothing else, but it's also not going to be an incredibly weak central government like the Articles of Confederation. There you go. How does the Constitution get ratified? You should be familiar with the overall aspects of this. Remember, there are Federalists and Anti-Federalists. Federalists are in favor of ratifying the Constitution. Anti-Federalists are against this. And please, 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 do not get this messed up. Remember, Anti-Federalists only exist during the time of the ratification debates. Many of them will become Democratic Republicans later. But if you're talking after 1788, let's say, you really don't want to be talking about the Anti-Federalists. They really only exist during the ratification debate. So that would be what I would recommend. Don't get those confused. And absolutely, absolutely, I'm very glad to see that everybody thinks that Thomasina is going to get a 5 this year, because I absolutely believe that she will as well. So how do they get it? How do they get it? Well, I think that the Federalist Papers perhaps have seen this before somewhere. This is going to be part of it, as well as the Bill of Rights. Sorry about this. I'm trying to get back into it. There we go. So Federalist Papers, those are papers authored by Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, James Madison, and those are the ones that say, hey, the Constitution is a good idea, and here's why. The Bill of Rights are going to be Bill of Rights are going to be a compromise where they're able to add in the Bill of Rights to make sure people go, oh, the federal government can't take away all of my rights. I feel a little bit better about giving it more power now. So the Bill of Rights are going to be a really big part of this. So, in the early republic, there's going to be plenty of migration that happens as well. Yeah, we're definitely, by the way, someone was just talking about this. We need to talk about the different kinds of party systems in America, because that is super confusing. We will definitely get to that. So, let's go there and talk about early republic migration. So, in the Western Territories, they're continually dealing with Native Americans, and by dealing with, it's a euphemism for white European settlers wanted to steal their land. So we're going to see things like Little Turtle and his rebellion a little bit later. Jay's Treaty is going to be very widely unpopular, but the idea here is we need to get the British out of their forts in the Midwest, think Northwest Territories, and Canada, get them to respect us, and then the United States is able to get territory all the way from the East Coast all the way to the Mississippi River. There's going to be other treaties like Pinckney's Treaty that gives us access to the Mississippi River, as well as to New Orleans. That's negotiated with Spain. There's the Whiskey Rebellion. Remember, that's where George Washington has to call out the troops. There might be some problems there when it comes to the strength of the federal government. Thankfully, he's able to put it down for some people. But this just shows that there are some tensions between backcountry folks and the coastal elites that are a little bit richer. Remember that the cotton gin is patented in time. This is going to lead to an explosion of slavery. One of the reasons that the founders were so comfortable kicking the can down the road with slavery or compromising on slavery is because they thought slavery would eventually go away like it was in the North. And it turns out it didn't really do that very well. And so, the cotton gin leads to an expansion of slavery. That's not good. And then don't forget, we also have Junipero Serra and the California missions. There are still some Spanish settlers out west in the American Southwest. Don't forget about them. They are fairly important when it comes to migration during this time period as well. Absolutely. So, just to review, Native Americans out west, Jay's Treaty about British forts, Pinckney's Treaty about access to the Mississippi through New Orleans to the port, Whiskey Rebellion illustrates coastal elites versus backcountry folks, and then cotton gin leads to an expansion of slavery. Shoot. All right. Let's talk about the government. We are almost done with this. Let's talk about George Washington's administration. Remember, he is the first American president. Hopefully, we're slightly familiar with that. So, Washington's administration, he is the first president, and we're going to see problems between Hamilton and Jefferson. Remember, Hamilton is his Secretary of Treasury, Jefferson is his Secretary of State, and we're going to see the two of them duking it out in his cabinet over all sorts of issues, like revolution. We're going to see them talking about banking. Should we have a national bank? Should we have a national debt? Federalism. Who should have more power, states or national government? And then eventually, those two sides are going to coalesce into the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans, the first two parties in American history, even though Washington didn't want parties. Yeah, that's kind of sad. But we have different ideas. Different parties can represent those ideas. And so we'll talk about that a little bit later too. George Washington's farewell address is something to be aware of. Remember, he says stay out of entangling alliances. I don't know about you. My class just started covering World War II, the Cold War, where the United States is definitely getting involved in world affairs. So George Washington's farewell address definitely influences American foreign policy for quite a long time. Oh, here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, the moment you've been waiting for. Here we go. Let's talk some Hamilton and Jefferson by looking at Cabinet Battle number 1. So I don't know how familiar you folks are with Hamilton, but if you haven't seen it, awesome. Please see it. It's on Disney+. This is going to be great. I would like to do some of this for you, and I would like us to be able to follow along here. So, speaking, we got Washington, Jefferson, then we got Hamilton. They're going to be talking about all sorts of events, like state debts. Should they assume them or not? We have a whiskey tax. Should we have a national bank? What about North versus South over slavery? We got foreign affairs. Should we side with the French like Jefferson wants or with the British? All kinds of stuff. And then liberty versus order kind of in general. So, we got Washington, Jefferson, Hamilton in that order. If you have access to the slides, which you should, you can click on Cabinet Battle number 1 and you can see we got ourselves a handy-dandy lyrics there that you can see. All right, we're going to try this out. So I just took off my headphones and removed my microphone so that way we can try to get some background music as we go through this. So, let's get some background music, let's lay down a beat, and let's get ready to do some reviewing via rapping. Here we go. So the first cabinet battle. Here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, you could have been anywhere in the world tonight, but you're here with us on this Fiveable live stream. Are you ready for a cabinet meeting? The issue on the table, Secretary Hamilton's plan to assume state debt and establish a national bank. Secretary Jefferson, he has the floor first. He said, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We fought for these ideals, we shouldn't settle for less. These are wise words, enterprising men quote them. Don't act surprised, you guys, cause I wrote them. Oh, but Hamilton forgets. His plan would have the government assume states' debt. Now, place your bets as to who that benefits. The very seat of government where Hamilton sits. Not true. Oh, if the shoe fits, wear it. If New York's in debt, why should Virginia bear it? Our debts are paid, I'm afraid. Don't tax the South, because we got it made in the shade. In Virginia, we plant seeds in the ground. We create. You just want to move our money around.
This financial plan is an outrageous demand, and it's too many dang pages for any man to understand. Stand with me in the land of the free and pray to God we never see Hamilton's candidacy. Look, when Britain taxed our tea, we got frisky. Imagine what gonna happen when you try to tax our whiskey. Woo! Here comes Secretary Hamilton. His response. He says, Thomas, that was a real nice declaration. Welcome to the president. We're running a real nation. Would you like to join us or stay mellow doing whatever the heck it is you do in Monticello? If we assume the debt, the union gets a new line of credit, a financial diuretic. How do you not get it? If we're aggressive and competitive, the union gets a boost. You'd rather give it a sedative? A civics lesson from a slaver? Hey neighbor, your debts are paid because you don't pay for labor. We plant seeds in the South. We create. Yeah, keep ranting. We know who's really doing the planting slaves. And another thing, Mr. Age of Enlightenment, don't lecture me about the war. You didn't fight in it. You think I'm frightened of you, man? We almost died in a trench while you were off getting high with the French. Thomas Jefferson, always hesitant with the president, reticent. There isn't a plan he doesn't jettison. Madison, you mad as a hatter, son, take your medicine. Dang, you in worse shape than the national debt is in. Sitting there useless as two spits. Hey, turn around, bend over, I'll show you where my shoe fits. And then Washington has to break them up. Whew, that was a little bit much. Hopefully, it didn't cut out during this time period. Oh my goodness. Let's see if we can put these back in.
Alrighty. Hopefully that cabinet battle was somewhat okay. And hopefully you'll learn something from it. Review the lyrics some other time, but notice they're talking about all kinds of stuff. And man, if you're not studying to the Hamilton soundtrack for APUSH, I don't know what you're doing with your life. So, yeah, you don't have the votes. Yes, absolutely. So if you haven't checked out the cabinet battle, please do so at some point. It's fantastic. And yeah, we have a whole bunch of things to unpack there if you'd like to for some studying, but we got to move on. So Hamilton, Jefferson, boom, clashing during the Washington administration. That's going to be a problem. So we talked about some of those things. Let's also talk about, if I can get back to it, John Adams, President. I know him. That can't be. He's the guy who's President 2 or maybe 3. Turns out 2, actually, because he does not win re-election. So he couldn't be the third president anyway. Anyway, let's talk about John Adams. He is a one-term president. There you go. And he's going to be in charge when we're dealing with the quasi-war. Remember, this is with France. This is talking about, okay, are we going to get on the side of the French or the British? We choose the British kind of for right now, even though the French were our allies before, because they've had that whole revolution. So there you go. The quasi-war, this is the XYZ affair. This is Citizen Genet. There's a whole bunch of stuff happening. Most importantly, of course, would be the Alien and Sedition Acts, where he's saying you can't even criticize the president, and I'm going to lock you up. It's a severe curtailment or taking away of civil liberties. The Kentucky-Virginia resolutions are written by Jefferson and Madison to be able to argue against this. Either way, Alien and Sedition Acts, I would know those because it's taking away civil liberties during wartime, a topic that comes up again and again. So there you go. Also be aware that he appoints John Marshall as one of his midnight judges, right? Last minute, he puts in John Marshall. John Marshall, going to be very important in period 4. We will get there. So there you go. John Adams, he's our second president. And then we got a couple things to wrap up here. National identity and culture. We start to get things like American English in there. We start to drop, well, you know, like we start spelling things differently, right? We start to take the U out of things. So when Britain asks, what are you doing? We say, we're removing you because we're doing this breakup thing. Phyllis Wheatley, remember, a famous enslaved African-American woman who writes fantastic poetry. We start to see American poetry as distinct from English poetry, from England. We have Gilbert Stuart in American art. There's an example of one of his famous paintings of George Washington. A lot of it's like, here, look at me. I am in this portrait. Somewhat English style, but somewhat new. And then we also have neoclassicism and American architecture. Now, I'm not worried that you know what all of these things are, but just realize that America is beginning to say, hey, look, I'm not just British, I'm now American too. So we're channeling our inner Greece and Rome with some of that neoclassicism and American architecture, but we're also putting our own spin on it. So, one last time. Another Hamilton reference there. The Revolutionary War, before, during, after. That's one of our big topics. The new government. See Washington and Adams. That's another big topic. And then migration and trade out west. Northwest Ordinance. Conflicts with Native Americans, etc. A lot of good stuff there. So that would be our last time to talk about the overview. Questions. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up the question and answer section. Hopefully this will work nicely for us. If you have a question, you can go ahead and put it into the, if it's like a larger overall question, put that into the question and answer segment. I believe it's below this stream somewhere. Otherwise, Thomasina can help us out in the chat with how to find that from your end. And you can upvote that. I'm going to give us a little bit of time to do that now. I'm going to probably answer them later because we need to get in some practice questions, but I wanted to give you a chance. We just went over a bunch of content. Let's talk about which ones that might be useful. So put them in there. Take a look through some of them. Like the ones that you want to have answered yourself. I'm glad this seems to be working pretty well. This is good. This is good. The Q&A right below this chat. Excellent. All right. While people are looking at the Q&A, let's go into some practice questions. Our first practice question is going to be this one. And I'm going to put a poll, open a poll for you. So Patrick Henry, delegate to the Virginia State Constitutional Ratification Convention given June 1788, which does he support, or would he likely support based on this particular excerpt? I'm going to show your options here. Not surprisingly, your options are A, B, or C. A, B, C, or D, sorry. But that hides my slides a little bit too much. So you can go right below it, and that should work pretty well. Do you think it's A, B, C, or D? We got some votes rolling in. This is working out well. While we're trying to vote, I'm going to talk this through a little bit. Looks like he says, here is a resolution to approve the Constitution, that's as radical as that which separated us from Great Britain. It's radical because our rights and privileges are endangered. Oh, that's never good. The sovereignty of the states will be relinquished, given away. Rights of conscience, trial by jury, liberty of the press are rendered insecure. That doesn't sound good. It sounds like he's worried about his rights getting taken away. So it sounds like he's not super hot on the constitutional ratification in general. Now, why might that be? Why is he worried about his rights getting taken away? Who or what might be taking away his rights? That's probably going to be a strong central government, which means that he is worried about the government being too strong, which means that our answer is going to be... Let me see if I can make this show up here. Oh, most of us are saying letter B. Turns out that is the correct answer. Yes. A weaker central government. Patrick Henry is worried about a strong tyrannical central government taking away his rights. That's going to be a problem. If this was a little bit of a struggle for you, remember, this was not a direct question in terms of, like Henry says in here, I don't like the government, and I don't want it to be strong. But it is saying that he's worried about his rights, and you have to infer who would be taking away those rights. It's the strong central government. So if you need to work on inferences a little bit, that might not be a bad idea for some of your multiple choice questions. Question 2. What most directly caused the concern of Henry and those with similar views? Well, okay, now we're on to the point where we need to talk about what causes people to be concerned about a strong central government. So I am going to archive question 1. Let's open the poll for question 2. What do you think? What caused the concern of Henry and those with similar views? Social unrest like Shays' Rebellion, concern with the expansion of slavery out west, problems with interstate trade caused by the Articles of Confederation, memories of British policies toward the colonies after 1763. We have 4 options. Looks like we got 5 votes so far. Yeah, inferencing. I'm glad some of you are liking that. That's the way to go, right? Got to work on that. And honestly, it's one of those things that just gets easier with practice, right? So we're going to be continuing to do these, and I urge you to. For sake of time, we're going to go along. Looks like many of us, looks like 82% of us said D, and that's good because that would be the answer. Yeah, think the British policies toward the Americas that take away some of their trials, like the admiralty courts that start trying American citizens, the Stamp Act, muzzling the press, things like that. So the poll is now closed. It's now published. Many of us got it right. Shays' Rebellion is going to lead people to want a strong constitution, and then same with the Articles of Confederation. That's going to lead people to want a strong constitution. He doesn't want one of those. All right, then last multiple choice question for today is going to be this. Which of the following events helped opponents of Henry succeed in their goals? First of all, we have to figure out who are opponents of Henry, and it sounds like he's against the Constitution, so we want those who are in favor of the Constitution. That's probably going to be the Federalists. So which of the following events help the Federalists succeed in their goals of getting the Constitution ratified? There we go. Sipping a little iced tea as we think about number 3. Does the addition of the Bill of Rights, the Whiskey Rebellion, formation of political parties, or treaties with foreign countries help the Federalists ratify their Constitution? Well, let's see here. We got about 40 votes or so. We have at least one vote for every option. So as a person who wrote this question, I am very flattered that some of you chose at least, one person chose at least all these options, so it wasn't just a gimme, and none of these were complete duds. So I appreciate that. Here we go. Number 3. It's going to be, as many of you said, letter A. Letter A, the addition of the Bill of Rights. Letter B is a reason why people want the Constitution to be written or the Constitutional Convention. Political parties is not going to happen yet. That's just chronologically out of the way. And treaties with foreign countries, again, too late and sort of unrelated at this point. But yes, the Bill of Rights is one of 2 ways in which the Federalists get their Constitution ratified. Okay. So now to move on to some practice short answer questions. Just for sake of time, and because we obviously have a lot of people watching this, we want to make sure, and perhaps you're not watching it live, we want to be able to go over a short answer question, be able to give a sample response, and then I want to be able to give you some of these to practice on your own. So, could you describe a specific similarity between the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution? Could you describe a difference? And then a reason for the difference mentioned in letter B. Hey, there we go. So, we're going to go over letter A and just give you one idea of how to answer this. Perhaps you've heard of the ACE method that comes from my friend Johnny Burkowski, talking about answer, cite, explain. You need to be able to drop some vocab, explain that you know what the vocab is, and then tell me how it answers the question. So here would be a really great way to talk about this. If we're talking about a similarity, you could do it this way, and I tried to annotate this in a way that would make it helpful for you folks. Both the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution sought to unite, oops, that's a typo, but that's okay. That's just to remind you that typos don't count. Sought to unite the several states against external threats. The Articles of Confederation gave the national government the sole power to declare war and make treaties, as it did during the Revolutionary War by fighting Great Britain and allying with France as one country. The Constitution likewise made the federal national government solely responsible for wars and treaties, helping the U.S. to stay unified in their neutrality in the midst of fighting between France and Great Britain in the 1790s. Whew, that's probably a bit too much. That's entirely fine. But my purpose here was just to give you a whole bunch of information and an example that kind of went over and above so that way we could talk about this. Notice if it's a similarity between, you want to mention something from both sides. You want to mention our Articles of Confederation and you want to mention the Constitution. It's also a good idea to add in some vocab. So I talked about Great Britain, France, the Revolutionary War, and then notice how I talked about how they both had unity. Unity was my similarity, right? So there we go. Just one way to talk about it. Make sure that you're dropping at least one vocab word per answer, and then if it talks about similarities, it's probably a good idea to talk about one from each side. There are some, remember B and C you can discuss a little bit later, do on your own if you'd like to. So let's talk about a potential Q prompt. And reminder, we're going to go over LEQs, DBQs, SAQs, all the writing stuff later on in more depth. This is just to kind of wrap up some of the content we've done so far and give you a little bit of practice along the way, so we're not just covering it at the very end. So we're evaluating the extent to which political debates divided the U.S. from 1785 to 1800. So this is going to be approximately from right before the Constitutional Convention to the election of Jefferson. Ooh, okay. Well, remember, DBQs have tons of moving parts, but the heart of most DBQs is going to be, after your own writing, of course, the document analysis. So how do we do that? Well, perhaps you use Hippo, perhaps you use Happy, but either way, here's one way to look at it. This is how you can analyze documents, right? Historical context, intended audience, purpose, point of view of the author, as well as give me some outside evidence that's perhaps prompted by the inclusion of a particular document, and that's one way to go. So, for the DBQ, or a document-based question, you might want to think about how you can write a good essay. That's a long essay question. But then also think about how you can add in the documents. I hate using the term document-based question sometimes because it makes people think, oh, I got to use all the documents in order and just like talk about them and quote them. Don't do that. But you want to be able to use the documents in the midst of your analysis. So here's one way to do it. Let's say we have the Northwest Ordinance as a document. Wait a minute, is this talking about political debates? I'm confused. Well, as I start to read through some of this, and you can take the time to read this in a bit more detail if you'd like to, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude. I'm looking at paragraph 3. Well, that sure seems like something that could be a political debate. No slavery up north, and yet the South is continuing to expand their slavery during this time. And so we're going to see some North-South debates. Huh. Sounds good. So that's maybe one way you could do it. Be creative with how you use it. We could hip this whole thing if we wanted to, talk about when this is happening, why this is happening, to whom it's written, etc. U.S. Constitution might be another document they could give you. This one I took a couple of quotes here talking about the 3/5 compromise. As well as the, we're not going to ban the international slave trade. Notice the term slave is not used, but sounds like I've already seen a connection here that could talk about slavery, sectional tensions. As you read through these documents, it's always a good idea to be thinking about what to each other. Perhaps can I put them into a common paragraph of some sort? That'd be one way to do it. Let's say we had an essay by Alexander Hamilton. Turns out this is a Federalist paper. And he is saying, it has been frequently remarked, seems to have been reserved to the people of this country to decide the important question whether societies of men are really capable of establishing good government. And then the last sentence there, if you're like, I don't even know what that means, look at that last sentence. I am clearly of the opinion it is your interest to adopt the new Constitution. Oh, okay. So there's going to be some political debates over the ratification of the Constitution. So now I'm starting to think, well, this is not really directly about slavery. This is perhaps more about political choices, setting up the government. You have options there, and that'd be one way to go about it with Alexander Hamilton. There are a ton of different documents that you could use. I'm just giving you some right here, and they're all involved in the slides. So if you'd like to take some time to practice, tie some of these documents back to the political debates in your own way. We got the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. This was just the Kentucky resolution. Here would be a possible intro paragraph. And we're going to dive into this a little bit later. But I start off with my contextualization. I say, during the Revolutionary War, the Articles of Confederation helped to unite the disparate, meaning separate, British North American colonies into a loose government for the purposes of defeating Great Britain and gaining independence. Notice I dropped a vocab word. I'm explaining how this is setting it up. The Articles of Confederation obviously exist before 1785, so I'm setting the stage. If you're in an English class, you would call this the setting. And then I'm sort of talking about and transitioning into my actual topic. After the U.S. gained independence with the Treaty of Paris, the states had to set aside their differences and work together to set up a new government, but divisions quickly emerged. Okay, I kind of set into that. So this is your introductory paragraph. We're doing contextualization. Then we're moving to a thesis. And there we go. Here's our transition. And then we have our thesis starting with the counterclaim. It's saying, did American debates divide the United States? Well, it's always a good idea to aim for some complexity by saying, yeah, there were some divisions that divided the United States, but there were also some things that kept it together. Ooh. So Americans were united in their desire to keep an independent republic. That stays consistent throughout the time period. But they were increasingly divided over sectional issues like slavery. Notice increasingly divided over sectional issues like slavery. Over arguments about federalism and the size of the over foreign policy items like European alliances. So I just gave 3 thesis subpoints. Those will become my 3 body paragraphs, and that's how you're going to do it. Now, in those body paragraphs, you folks know from your English writing classes that you're going to use evidence to support your thesis by supporting your topic sentences in your body paragraphs. What counts as evidence? That's both outside evidence that you know and summaries and analysis of the documents. We'll do a little bit of that later. For now, let me just give you one possible example. I was talking about slavery earlier, right? Slavery was a big dividing line. So the southern states are embracing and expanding slavery. Northern states are stepping away from slavery. And so I summarized document 1, which was the Fugitive Slave Clause and the 3/5 Compromise. Those are all from document 1. Notice how I am citing it just by using the number 1. You don't have to say document, because that just doesn't make any sense. It just takes up too much time and it clutters up your essay. And then I'm going to talk about historical context by saying these provisions were included so that the southern states would join the Constitutional Union because they considered slaves to be their property because of the cotton gin. Ooh, that's going on at the same time. That's some nice analysis, some extra vocab that you can add in there. At the same time, I added some outside information through gradual emancipation happening up north where slavery is ending. So this leads to, again, dividing sections over time over slavery. So notice my body paragraph starts off with a topic sentence. That's the first sentence. That connects back to my thesis subpoint. And then the rest of it is all evidence. And all of that evidence is going to be either document analysis, outside evidence that ties back to my thesis. We'll discuss this a bit more later, of course, in subsequent streams, but I wanted to give you an example of that. Now, I have an entirely new prompt that we, of course, don't have any time to get to because we're having way too much fun and we had too many problems with Vimeo being frozen at the beginning. But this is a potential LEQ or DBQ prompt. You're welcome to use this on your own time. It's pretty awesome. You could make this an LEQ and just straight up write a 5-paragraph essay. Evaluate the reactions of North American colonists to British policies that led to the American Revolution in the period 1754, 1783, end of the Revolutionary War. And I included, now if you want to write it as an LEQ, obviously you just write the essay. If you want to do it as a DBQ, you might want to add some documents. Now this document's before the time period, which seems a little bit weird, but you could potentially make it work. So keep going. There's a whole bunch of documents if you wanted to practice doing some document analysis. We got the Navigation Act, some cartoons from Ben Franklin. We got Royal Proclamations, aka Proclamation Line of 1763. We got the Stamp Act. I'm just throwing a whole bunch of documents at you folks, so that way you can do some practice on your own time if you would like to. So you can make this a long essay question, just write it yourself, or you can start analyzing some documents and make this into a DBQ, a document-based question. That's up to you. We got cartoons, we got pictures, we got acts, so many acts. Fantastic. So I just wanted to give you a whole bunch of those. Some of them are more famous than others, even including the Declaration of Independence, the Articles of Confederation. I'm just skimming through these because it's all about what you want to do when you practice. So let's wrap up this evening, and I'm going to get to some of your questions in just a second. A reminder for study tips, you want to make sure you're using historical thinking skills like compare and contrast, comparing apples and oranges. You want to be able to do active recall, and you want to keep coming back to us here at Fiveable because we got you. And there's, remember, a Discord happening afterwards. Thomasina has been great answering your questions in the chat, as has Sander, as has Harrison. We got all kinds of Fiveable people that are here to help you out. And so continue to watch Fiveable, engage with us on Discord. Those would be great places to go. I would also urge you to look at historical thinking skills graphically, if that helps. If you're a visual person, not a bad idea. So we got some examples like compare and contrast loyalists and patriots, potentially. You could talk about causes and effects of the Revolutionary War. Sounds good. All right, here's some examples there. Could you do a CCOT, a change in continuity over time? How do things change or stay the same leading up to the Revolutionary War? Got a whole bunch of years that happen in the middle there and what happens with the event. And then as you do all of this, here are just some examples of potential ways you could talk about historical thinking skills in period 3, comparing and contrasting various options causation, cause and effect, change and continuity over time. Sorry, my dumb face is blocking that last one. It's foreign policy, so how does that change over time? You got some options. And I already talked about some of these study tips already, but I just thought I'd mention these ones. Remember, politics are a big deal in period 3, partly because we're getting our independence, so be able to do that. All right, now on to some of your questions that you had to end our stream together here. What are some changes and continuities for this time? Hey, we just kind of talked about that a little bit, about how that's an important question to ask, so I'm really glad that you did that. I would say a continuity is that the United States is skeptical of centralized government. The United States does not want to be under Britain's thumb, and yet a lot of changes are realizing, hey, maybe a constitution is necessary. Maybe revolution is necessary, even though we believe in the rights of Englishmen the whole time. Maybe the rights of Englishmen involve independence. Maybe the rights of Englishmen involve having a president who's kind of king-like in some people's minds. So those would be some great ways to think about that. So, changes and continuities for this time. Think about ways politics change. They have the same concerns. Slavery continues to be an issue that divides. We got some options. Some people were talking about Jay's Treaty and for some of those things. Some people are asking about the XYZ affair and the quasi-war. Remember, the XYZ affair is when we send, hey, give us some bribes, and we say, no bribes, we just want to negotiate with you because we want free trade. And the 3 people that were allegedly soliciting or asking for bribes were codenamed X, Y, and Z because we didn't want to expose them publicly. Well, after we refused to pay their bribe, we had this thing called the quasi-war. It wasn't an official war, but the idea was that we were trying to trade with Britain and France, neither of whom liked us trading with the other person. So it turns into a quasi-war when the French keep attacking our ships. By the way, look up the XYZ affair on an animated movie that maybe some of you have seen where it talks about the French are attacking American ships. And it's really fun. It involves like an opera. So look for that. It's kind of an old school animation, but it's a lot of fun. Let's see. We had ourselves the Whiskey Rebellion. Oh, remember, so Hamilton's financial plan for the government involves a whiskey tax, which is an easy way to make some money. The problem is farmers who make whiskey makes it more expensive. They don't like that. And so the next thing you know, we have farming to pay the whiskey tax. And this is going to be a problem where Washington has to potentially call it the army and put them down. Thankfully, it manages to dissipate. But the idea here is that there is still some rebellion, especially amongst backcountry folks. And Jefferson likes this because he likes rebellion. Hamilton does not because he likes more order and centralized government. So we got options. We talked about some of those things. Alexis kind of asked a general question here. Best ways we can review for this period outside of cram sessions. Again, I gave you lots of practice questions that we didn't necessarily get to today. So if you have some time to do some practice questions, that would be one way to do it. That I think would be very effective. I would also make sure you're quizzing yourself. Remember I talked about active recall? That means quizzing yourself. Don't just reread your notes. Don't just reread your chapters. Don't just watch a video and just stare at it the whole time. Your brain needs to work to remember things, and the harder it works to remember things, the better it remembers it later. That's just psychology. So I would quiz yourself. That involves Quizlets. That involves mind mapping. That involves, all right, I'm going to do a practice prompt. I'm not going to look at the answers. I'm not going to look at my book. I'm just going to write everything that I can, do my best. Those would be some options. Dan was asking if I could do a Guns and Ships cover. Not this time, unfortunately, but I'm glad that my rapping last song during the stream didn't scare you off too much. And then we got some other ones asking about, let's see. Oh, asking about the political parties. We'll discuss political parties a little bit more next time, so that should be really, really good. All right, well, we are over the time. I tried to make up a little bit of that choppiness early on. So, we're cutting out a lot too. Shoot, that's not fun. Hopefully it's getting a little bit better, but hopefully we were able to answer some of your questions. So, remember, we got APUSH Trivia. This is super exciting. We get APUSH Trivia. Here are links to all the trivia. Feel free to go along with some of that if you'd like to. And this would be a great way to quiz yourself, as we were talking about active recall. This is a great way to quiz yourself. go do some APUSH trivia, review what you just learned in class or what you just reviewed in this cram session in the Unit 3 trivia coming up. And then, of course, we have the conversation continuing on the Fiveable forums in Discord, led by our very own Thomasina. She's awesome. It's happening right after this. It's going to be fantastic. So I hope you folks have learned some stuff, or at least you've reviewed some stuff that you already previously learned. We are here next week going over Unit 4. We got you. We are into this together. So you've got this. This is why we call it Fiveable, right? I think you folks are able to get a 5. You can do it. We're on our good road together. We just reviewed a ton of stuff. You just did a ton of work. So kudos to you for putting in the work. Nice job. We'll see you next time. Have a